Good evening, I'm Jaime Refutation, and today I'll be giving my refutation speech on fellow student Evelyn Hernandez. I'll be refuting her main claim being that the medical marijuana policy in California, being the expanded patients' rights to possess, transport, and have larger amounts of marijuana is counterproductive in California. Now, my opponent's secondary claims are as follows. 1, medical marijuana has a negative impact on health. 2, other medical drugs make medical marijuana necessary. And 3, medical marijuana has a negative impact on society. Now, to begin with, I'd like to address the advocate's first supporting claim, which is medical marijuana has a negative impact on health. She goes on to support this claim by stating that marijuana is emotionally and physically addictive. The advocate's definition of addiction is to be challenged here, as psychologically, addictive drugs will cause a craving, and physically, a withdrawal similar to that of a heroin addict. Now, marijuana in this case, according to former Surgeon General Jocelyn Elders, is not physically addictive, and can be in fact seen less addictive when compared to other commonly used substances. So the question is, how does marijuana compare to these classically addictive drugs? Now, in a study on marijuana addiction published by Time magazine, the estimates vary, but compared with tobacco, which hooks about 20 to 30% of smokers, marijuana is much less addictive, coming in at 9% to 10%. In contrast, 23% to 25% of heroin users get addicted, along with 15% of alcohol users and 15 to 20% of those who use cocaine. Now, the advocate also states that there are no FDA-approved cannabis drugs, which brings me to the advocate's second supporting claim that medical marijuana is unnecessary with the availability of other medical drugs. Now, in her second claim, cannabis has several chemicals in that prove useful for treating a range of illnesses and symptoms. The FDA has made many efforts to harness these therapeutic benefits in such synthetic legal drugs referred to as cannabinoids that are prescribed as legal, FDA-approved alternatives to medical marijuana that carry the same strength to combat the symptoms that marijuana would be used for. Now, the advocate goes on to support her second claim by stating that there's FDA-approved alternatives for pain relievers and nausea for those who are suffering from post-chemotherapy treatments and for cancer and individuals with AIDS. And although these drugs are prescribed as alternative to cannabis, to combat these symptoms, they may just have the same side effects, or not worse. Now, according to the drugabuse.gov, the same source that the advocate had used, I found that Marinol and Cisamet that are common alternatives offered to these patients that stimulates the appetite, controls nausea and vomiting, and aids in relieving pain related to cancer treatment. Now, because these are pills, if you're experiencing nausea, vomiting, and are taking Marinol or other drugs to combat these effects, you have to make the effort to keep the drug down long enough for it to be absorbed, which may be quite difficult when you're vomiting. As well as, and with the side effects reported by users causing exaggerated drowsiness, cloudy thinking has caused users to discontinue the drug. It has also been reported that the psychoactive effects of these drugs can last for several hours after consumption, making it less controlled as using medical marijuana. Now, the FDA alternatives to medical marijuana give the same, if not worse, side effects as medical marijuana that had caused some users to discontinue the alternatives, as well as very inconvenient when you're taking pills when you're trying to keep for vomiting. You can't necessarily digest it correctly when you're vomiting it out. Now, on to the advocate's third supporting claim, was that medical marijuana has a negative impact on society. She goes on to support this claim by stating that it's a gateway drug. And the advocate fails to support the main supporting claim with sufficient evidence, as there isn't a conclusive evidence that marijuana is in fact a gateway drug. It may be clear that illicit drug users have experimented with marijuana at some point in time, but according to the Center of Substance Abuse, in a study that marijuana, in a study on marijuana users, the majority, 62%, did not progress to use other illicit drugs. Let's not forget that marijuana was widely used as a medicinal marijuana up until the Tax Act of 1937, making the possession of cannabis illegal. Lastly, the advocate states that it's a Schedule I drug, standing next to LSD, ecstasy, and heroin. Now, there already is a debate on the subject matter, as Schedule I drug is defined as a drug that has no accepted medical use, with a lack of accepted safety for the use of a drug. Now, on the contrary, the FDA has already made the effort to make use of these phytochemicals within the hemp for its therapeutic benefits, and has already been made legal in the state of Colorado, making it available not only for medicinal purposes, but for recreational too. This contradicts marijuana's place as Schedule I drug by definition, and thus makes it an irrelevant support to the advocate's third claim. In conclusion, we can see that medical marijuana is not counterproductive, but has been shown to have some benefits versus its alternative drugs. In comparison to drugs, it is supposed to in comparison to its drug's supposed Schedule I class, that it doesn't meet the criteria and is classified as such, and its availability to the public doesn't necessarily mean it will lead to more illicit drugs. Thank you very much.
All right, well, the main and secondary claims are labeled pretty clearly. As you get to the first signpost, you're pretty specific as to where you are in the argument. You challenge the notion of addictive by suggesting comparisons to other medications or other products that people use that are addictive. I think that that's interesting. However, it does seem to suggest that your own statistic, that 9% become somewhat dependent on this. So the notion that it's not addictive, I think, is undermined by part of your evidence. Now, the question is how addictive it is and whether or not that is substantially medically harmful or undesirable. I think you needed a little bit more follow-up on that. On the question of whether or not medical marijuana is necessary, the advocate is did the advocate, I can't quite remember if the advocate was pointing to those synthetics that are available for being used. That, by the way, I do think on your third point where you're saying, the FDA has already acknowledged that it's not without some medical benefit, but it's only in particular context that they're going to approve that usage. I think that argument is stronger on that third point rather than on this particular point. Here it seems to be an argument about strength and what the side effects are. I was a little bit confused because basically you're saying that the synthetics that are being used have the same side effects. So is the argument that there is no difference between the medical marijuana that's being used that people would smoke and those synthetic drugs that people have to take in terms of their dosage or effectiveness? I was not clear what the argument was there. The one thing that was clear was an argument that you made that said taking it in an oral form is problematic for people who are trying to fight nausea problems in the first place with their chemotherapy treatments or whatever, that if you had to take a pill that's complicated. That's mostly an assertion. It sounds like a reasonable assertion in this particular case, but I don't know if there's any documentation on that or any particular examples that go along with that. The issue of cloudy thinking, obviously there's cloudy thinking if you're under the influence of those drugs one way or the other, so I'm not exactly sure that shows that it's unnecessary. It just shows that it has the same kind of effects. On the third point, your argument is that on the gateway part, you basically suggest that there is not any significant reason to believe that it's any worse than any other drugs and that other drugs are more likely to have that kind of connection. That's okay. You did make a reference to the Tax Act of 1937, and you said it's widely used before that. I didn't hear any evidence on that particular point, so if it was widely used, then we should be able to see some data on that. On the like I said, and then I thought that the argument that you suggested that there's an inconsistency here because the FDA has approved it, that seems to undermine the premise of Schedule I labeling. That part makes sense. Why Colorado, though, contradicts this issue, I don't know. That doesn't make any sense. I think you're doing a lot of reading, but you had some interesting points that you brought up, and there were a few places where you presented some evidence that also helped your position. All right.